being with us here on Al Jazeera. What do you think of these plans?
Well, I think they're inevitable because they're being forced by Congress. Congress has mandated substantial cuts through what they call sequestration. And this sequester has had devastating impact because it's across the board without any regard to the overall strategy. And I think what Secretary Hagel has done is to try and shape the forces to fit the president's strategy, national security strategy, which is the way it's supposed to be done, rather than just hacking a budget across the board, affecting everybody without regard to what the strategy or the missions are. So I think he's trying to make the best of a very difficult situation, but Congress, if they want to reduce the size of the national debt and the annual deficits, they have to be willing to belly up to the bar, so to speak, and pass the reductions.
And of course, there's a lot of criticism. I mean, I'm wondering what you think of this strategy, this change in approach, because a lot of people are saying that it's going to hurt the US's military readiness.
Well, the one thing that the Secretary is trying to do and the military is going to do is insist that readiness not be hurt. Namely, you can reduce the size of the force. You also will have to understand you have a higher risk on various missions, but you can reduce the size of the force, but you must do it in a way that protects readiness. That means training and equipping and making sure that the unit cohesion is solid so that you don't have a hollow force. And that's why these cuts are really tailored to make sure that readiness is not sacrificed. They will sacrifice modernization. Modernization will be delayed, and there will be other impacts. But if you're going to have a Congress that says we're going to cut across the board, this is a better approach than what Congress has adopted.
There's one point that was made by a retired General Jack Keane. I'm sure you've heard it, but for the sake of our viewers, I'll just repeat it. He says that the Pentagon doesn't believe that the US will involve itself in ground war of any consequence again, that those assumptions have been made after World War II, Korea, Vietnam and the Cold War, and that every single time they've been proved wrong. Sorry, I'm just wondering what your response to that is, Secretary Cohen.
I'm sorry, I lost connection to you, but I understand that General Keane has indicated that we are not preparing for the future land war. But basically, we don't know what the future is going to hold for us. It may not be necessary to have a large land force for the next 10 years. But it might be 20 years from now, and this is what is required to look at this very carefully as you downsize to make sure you don't go below a certain level. When I was at the Pentagon, we had roughly 485,000 in the Army active duty. So they're planning to cut down to roughly 450. Some would take it down much further. When you start getting much further down than the 450, then you're running into a situation which I think you're compromising our security. But that's a decision that the President and the Congress working together will have to resolve, as well as the American people.
And I'm hearing very strongly that the US is going to keep up its military readiness and that it will be able to get involved in battles overseas as well as protect its own interests. But I'm just wondering on a psychological level what message this downsizing is sending to the world, because the US touts itself as the global police. But is it not stepping back in that role now?
Well, you have to also look at capability. And even though the size of the force may be coming down, the capability will be going up in terms of the modern systems that will be used. We also have to face the new cyber world, and this is something that hasn't been emphasized enough, that the capacity for state actors, to be sure, but non-state actors as well, to really attack our infrastructure, our ability to conduct business in this country, our ability to maintain our national defense capabilities. All of that is subject to attack today. And so the cyber defense, cyber modernization, cyber offensive capability is going to be very important moving forward. So I think the President is correct to raise this to a much higher level than it's been today, because most people are completely unaware of the tens of thousands of attacks that are taking place daily, stealing intellectual property to be sure, but also probing ways in which an opponent, be it state actor or non-state actor, could shut down critical elements of our ability to function as a society.
Just to go back finally to this ground troops, the replacement of ground troops with special forces and drones. I mean, this is making the US's role more anonymous, isn't it? And therefore slightly less reassuring.
I've always felt that it's important to have a physical presence, that when you're there physically, people see you, countries see you, they understand that you have someone, your men and women at risk along with them. And that is a major psychological advantage. When you are no longer visible, there's less reliance, less trust, less confidence in the willingness of the American people to fight alongside those of our allies. So there's a major psychological impact here that has to be dealt with and dealt with in a fair-minded, responsible fashion, yes.
Secretary Cohen, very good to speak to you. Thanks again for taking the time to speak to us.
My pleasure.